This video is by Straight Goods News, SGNews.ca.
Late last week, RCMP documents filed in court revealed many new details about the $90,000 secret payout to Mike Duffy from the Prime Minister's then Chief of Staff, Nigel Wright. And these are details that contradict the Prime Minister Harper's version of events. According to the RCMP documents, at least 3 key people in Mr. Harper's office knew about the plan to cover up Mr. Duffy's expense scandal with a secret payout. So this clearly was not, as the Prime Minister told us, a case of Nigel Wright acting alone. The RCMP alleges that this was part of a deal to pay off Mike Duffy's expenses, which are now being investigated as potential fraud against the Canadian people, that involved a whitewash of a Senate report in exchange for the Senator's silence. The RCMP investigators have called this, quote, an offense of frauds on the government. We've also learned that it was Mr. Harper's appointed Conservative Senator Irving Gerstein, now in charge of the Conservative Fund, who apparently initially agreed for the party to pay for Mr. Duffy's ill-gotten expenses. And this certainly contradicts the government claims that the Conservative Party wasn't involved. It also contradicts claims that Mr. Wright was simply trying to avoid having the taxpayers face a burden because the Conservative Fund is heavily subsidized by the taxpayers. And we know now that the Conservative Party seems happy to have paid off Mr. Duffy's debts. The only problem was they decided that the price tag was too high. But surely if a payout to keep a senator quiet was potentially illegal at $90,000, then surely it would have been considered illegal at $30,000. New Democrat leader Thomas Mulcair has asked the Prime Minister simple and straightforward questions about who in the Prime Minister's office was involved in the secret payout. He's asked about the involvement of the Conservative Party. He's asked about the involvement of the Prime Minister's chief legal advisor. And we learn now through the RCMP court documents that time and time again, Mr. Harper's answers simply don't add up. So we're looking at the issue of a secret cover-up orchestrated out of the Prime Minister's office with the knowledge of the Conservative Party and the fact that the Prime Minister and his senior ministers have willfully missed Canadians. We need to remember that Prime Minister Stephen Harper is the minister legally responsible for what happens in the Prime Minister's office. He is also the head of the Conservative Party. The Prime Minister must explain how a secret cover-up, including a large payout that was intended to keep a potential fraud quiet, was allowed to happen on his own watch and in his own office. The Prime Minister must also explain what repercussions there will be for the staff and the key senators involved. Senator Gerstein is not only a senior Conservative senator, he's the head of the Conservative Fund. After Senators Wallin and Duffy have resigned in disgrace alongside with the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, what repercussions will Mr. Gerstein now face? And what about the key members in the Prime Minister's office who've been named as well as being involved? And we continue to say, as we've said all along, that we need to have an independent investigator who can work in parallel to the criminal investigation. There are many issues of conflict of interest here, possible breaches of parliamentary ethics that may be beyond the realm of a criminal investigation, but for accountability to Canadians, the Prime Minister needs to assure that we can get to the bottom of everything that has happened. But to do that, first and foremost, we need the Prime Minister and the senior Conservatives implicated to come forward and simply tell Canadians the truth. What I find really hard to understand is we're dealing with a payout that surely should have risen red flags about the potential illegalities and just the fundamental plain wrongness of it. The fact that the Prime Minister's chief legal advisor didn't raise the red flag, that the executive assistant didn't raise the red flag, that his troubleshooter on key issues didn't raise the red flag. How can we have trust in the Prime Minister's office if they go back to business as usual? I think the Prime Minister needs to say, does he take this seriously, and will he hold people to account? Well, if what the Prime Minister is claiming is true, that this all went on under his nose, nobody told him, are we to believe that they all just got quiet when he walked in the office, that they'd all sneak out for a coffee to conjure this plot up? If all that's true, then what's he going to do about it? That's the question that has to be put to the Prime Minister, because right now he seems to be very lackadaisical about the fact that we're talking about payoffs, cover-up, and potential fraud. So I asked the Prime Minister, are you going to hold your staff to account if they did this without your knowledge. 15 pages of straightforward, simple questions asked by our leader to the Prime Minister, and 15 pages of evasions, prevarications, and falsehoods. So I asked the Prime Minister, at this time, is your plan to just get through this and to hope the Canadians won't notice when we're talking about issues of fraud, we're talking about issues of cover-up, and the involvement of his party and his senior staff? If he's not willing to take responsibility for that, then this lies with the Prime Minister and nobody else.